Welcome to the Engineering Emotions and Energy Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Wink. Today, we're going to be talking about what I think is a very timely topic, very necessary. We're going to be talking about the transformative power of travel. And our guest today is Tom Leegstra. And so he's got a new book on this topic, and I read it and I've been just wowed. And so I do want to let you know a little bit about our guest. So he's a well-seasoned traveler. Oh man, my notes just went out of the way.
Cut.
Man, no, this is it. You're seeing how the sausage is made. So, I do as much prep as possible, and sometimes the best prep just goes completely off the rails when you go live. It's, is it the Bill Gates blue screen of death demoing Windows 95 situation where it's like, you would have thought you would have tested that, and sometimes it still goes wrong. So Tom, he's visited 43 countries. He was born in the Netherlands and lives with his wife in the U.S. When not traveling, he's an author, motivational speaker, certified life coach, and hypnotherapist. I've actually had a chance to have a hypnotherapy session with Tom. He's phenomenal. And his mission is to share his passion for travel with as many people as possible. If you want to learn more about Tom, you can go to tomleegstra.com. That's going to be in the show notes. And he's got a free overview of how to travel in challenging times. And coming out of COVID, I don't know if we can get much more challenging than this. So welcome to the show, Tom. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, Justin. I'm very excited to be on your show, and I've listened to your podcast a few times, and I love this. I love the work that you're doing and the way you're headed with this. So I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I when I saw that you had this book out on Amazon with the title, I was like, "What? You got to be kidding! This is like the most timely topic ever." As people are starting to get vaccinated, or maybe they got the natural vaccination by already contracting COVID, and worldwide restrictions are, maybe if they're not lifted yet, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I know I love to travel, but many people maybe have never traveled internationally, or maybe now they're like just scared shitless, honestly, because they're not, in addition to, it was scary before, now, well, what are all the restrictions and things like that? So I think this is great for people to start thinking about travel now, like start booking plans so that, as the summer and fall, when it's going to be a lot more easy and there's going to be a lot more travel opportunities, they're ready for it. And I like how you start your book. It's a very provocative introduction where it's let's start by taking off of our clothes. And at first I was like, boy, did Tom know my first international travel experience where I went to an onsen in Japan when I literally had to take off my clothes to go do that. And but really it's a metaphor for because when we go to some place we've never been before, it's vulnerable. And so I thought that ended up being a really great metaphor. And I was just curious, out of all your travel experiences, what has been maybe your most naked, or where you just felt the most raw and like, wow, I am way out of my element, because you've been so many places now.
Yeah, I've been to so many places and been really fortunate because every place teaches you something very different, right? Very unique, that sometimes you don't realize in the moment, but a few years later, right, you think about those experiences like, wow, I actually learned quite a bit. And I think that's part of what I write about in the book as well. But when it comes to, I guess, the most vulnerable moment, I definitely feel like India, because it's such a different environment, right? And even though they're speaking like the English language, which I guess makes it a little easier to adapt, just the whole environment is so different, right? It's very raw, it's very real, feel very disorganized, very different style of operation. And yeah, you just feel like it's almost like a sense of overwhelm when you first get there, right? And there's so much noise and so many things happening, cows walking on the street, people honking their cars right at you. And yeah, I feel like that's just such a wow. You really have to get settled in a little bit and kind of digest a little bit of all the different senses because everything is so heightened. And more specifically, like India, I'm not sure how familiar you are, Justin, with India, or if you've ever been there or read about India, but people usually say, well, be careful what you eat, be careful about the water that you drink, right? You have to be very mindful of all of that. But regardless of all of the precautions, still, yeah, one can find themselves in a predicament where you eat something a little too spicy or a little off, and yeah, those moments where you're like, yeah, I'm not sure if I can make it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was you become pretty vulnerable at those moments, especially when you're like in a foreign country as well.
Oh yeah. And eh, it's sometimes it's those bad times, like when you did eat something that didn't agree, and that's where the real growth, because there's like oh, I might die, and then you don't, and it's like, oh well, what else can I do if I could make it through that. Yeah, because I haven't been to India yet. It's like I was actually thinking of like, oh man, I want to plan an India trip, and found out about your book, and you had a whole section, and there's a lot of similarities between India, and I've been to places like Thailand, Philippines, things like that, where it's just like from the Western perspective, it seems like complete chaos. It's like that,
Yeah.
whereas the lane markers, people are driving in the opposite side of the road and things like that, and um, but then there ends up being like, wait, maybe there's something to this. Like maybe it's not so great from where I come from, or maybe there's a little bit of good, because in some ways there's a lot of freedom and a lot of efficiency when you kind of let go of, well, it's right because that's where I came from, and just like, well, let me look from the big picture.
Yeah, that is so true. That's what I realized as well afterwards, right? I think sometimes when you're in the moment, you're so immersed in it that you cannot really see those realizations yet until afterwards, right? When you really digest your experience and are back in maybe an environment that you do know, where you can really reflect on what you've just noticed and also think back about, hey, what was really different that I liked about this, right? Because, like you said, at first it may seem or look like chaotic, but later on you kind of learn that there's actually a order to the what we call madness, right?
Yeah.
And I remember seeing a documentary once on India, very different, where they were looking at a delivery service of what I believe, if I'm not mistaken, lunch,
Uh-huh.
and they were so efficient that they all did it by bike and bus, and it had to be exactly measured to get to the different people's offices exactly in time. So that made me realize, wow, it may look to the outside that it is very chaotic, but to the people itself, it could be actually very efficient and very orderly.
That's pretty amazing to just consider, from what we would say is like, well, this seems like chaos and madness, that if you actually know it, you could get down to the minute granularity, which I don't know, traveling here in the US, it's almost like I can never guarantee down to the minute whether I'm going to show up, even if it's just going from one side of my small suburban town to the other, because it's like, oh man, I had missed the light or whatever. And so that's pretty pretty
Yeah.
astonishing, actually. One of the things I really like of how you've done this book is it's not just you know it maybe people have seen a regular travel book or not, or seen, and usually it takes you through, well, what are the sites, how do you get there, and what are the descriptions. But this, it's more of like the emotional journey that you go on through. And so you can practice like having that experience of like, oh my gosh, what is the toilet going to be like before you actually do it. Although that you do kind of mention this with your time, that there is no substitute for actually being there, but it does help to do, the pregame, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, it almost feels like it helps you prepare a little bit, at least to have an idea, right, as to what you could potentially expect, despite that once you are at the destination itself, right, it's very different to what you had imagined it to be. Right? It's kind of like watching a show on TV about the destination, right? And you get your certain ideas and impressions, but then we actually get there and being fully immersed in that environment, right, with all the chaos of the day or whatever it comes up for you during that time, right? Whether it's, hey, maybe I'm tired from a long flight, to, hey, somebody is like asking you something on the street and you're like not in that particular state of or frame of mind where you're like, oh, not right now, right? I just feel like I just want to have a peaceful moment for myself. But you can't really predict that, right? When you're in those environments, the only thing that can help you is maybe anticipate some of those things that could come up, right? Through maybe looking at those shows or reading a good book, right? Or listening to a great podcast about the topic. So at least you're somewhat prepared mentally that, hey, I could end up in this situation, and what would I potentially do when I do end up in a situation like that, right? To maybe get more focused and centered.
Yeah, and so often, like most of our fears, when we actually start to put words to them, they really start to fall away, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's not so bad. Like, um, when it's just sort of like that ambiguous emotional feeling of like, oh well, there could be people trying to sell me things aggressively, like, and it's just that it's like, I don't even like people selling me things here in the U.S. based off of the structure I know, and but then, like, because I think that's one of the situations you said was really challenging. Like, you felt a lot of anger during like a pushy salesperson at a market or something, and so it's sort of like, and yeah, that for me has been really challenging. But then it's like, to help to know that, like, well, this is what you can expect, and then it's like, oh yeah, I guess it wouldn't be that bad. I can just say no, or maybe I do buy something I didn't want to. Like, in the grand scheme of life, who cares if you wasted $10 on, or I don't know, like, yeah, and all this stuff, and it ends up being
Yeah.
like nothing. And I really do like that about the book, that it's sort of like, hey, let's emotionally get into this trip. Don't just like be a bystander. Like, get in here and then actually get out there and do the trip.
Feeling overwhelmed by the daily grind? Imagine if you could pause, reset, and truly connect with a calmer, more fulfilled you. It's not just a dream, it's absolutely possible. Hi, I'm Justin, and I invite you to discover the life-changing techniques in my book, Engineered to Love. Right now, I'm offering a free chapter complete with guided audios that have already helped so many people find peace amidst the chaos. These aren't just any techniques. They're transformative practices designed to help you love yourself and engage deeply with the present moment, without even having to close your eyes to the world around you. So join us at engineeredtolove.com/sample and access your free guided session. It's time to bust the busyness and embrace the joy, ease, and love in your everyday life. Don't wait. Start your journey to a more relaxed and recharged you today, because you deserve to live a life you love. Visit engineeredtolove.com/sample. See you there.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating that that's something that you got onto, because sometimes, right, in those moments when we're at a certain stage of our life or a certain state of mind and we go through some of these emotions, right, we don't even realize that we're actually doing it, right? I mean, only years later, I look back at some of the photos and think, oh, wow, I remember that moment where, I remember I got frustrated by that particular incident just because I felt this person was trying to push me onto something that I didn't want. And I, at that time, had no idea to set a proper boundary and say no, maybe like with empathy. And rather, I just got frustrated and angry at the person, right? So it's kind of almost, and maybe going back to your earlier question on being vulnerable, right, it kind of exposes you to yourself in a way, right, to your own emotions, to maybe where you still need to grow and learn, rather than maybe it being in the environment itself, right? I think we evolved through our travels too with that realization. At least I feel I did throughout the years and reflecting back on it.
Yeah, and you bring up the metaphor of the taking off the mask, so you can kind of truly be yourself, and that's one of the best ways to really be alive on the travel, is to just let go of these things. And um, I I think one of the great things to learn is that when you're in another country, especially traveling alone, because is it nobody really cares one way or the other. They don't care about your mask, and they don't care about you not having the mask. Like, they're doing their own thing and they don't care. Whereas, like, we're so used to surrounding ourselves with people that seem to have a vested interest in, the mask that we wear, that if we take it off, it seems that you go somewhere else and they're doing their thing, and, they're happy to help you, but happy if you don't care. And just that, oh, I can be a different way and people will be okay with me, is, I don't know, it's amazing.
Yeah, to me that's fascinating as well, Justin, because right, so many times we think that people want something from us or they want us to be a certain way or behave a certain way, right? Just because I think we've been told that through our upbringing, right, in our process or our environment. And I think throughout we create this, like you said, like the mask, right? We create these different masks or different personas that we put to almost, I guess, protect ourselves because we feel like, hey, this person is maybe going to expect this or that or the other. While the reality, maybe to your point, right, is that they may not expect anything at all from us, right? They just, hey, we don't even know you, right? We just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
want you to show up the way you are showing up right now.
And a little bit of the flip side of that is depending on what country you go to, you can become a standout, a special, I think, like almost like a foreign creature of interest. Because I know when you went to India, you're like, I was, probably one of the few 6'2" white blonde guys, and I am also a white dude as well, and there's something about you don't know when you're just going around Western cultures that for the most part you're a blank slate. Nobody thinks one way or the other, which is the bit of where the entitlement and stuff related comes from that. When you go to another country and you're the rarity and there's attention, it could be good or bad, but it really helps to put yourself in the shoes of other people at home that do
Right.
not look like and maybe get judged just because of their appearance. And that's been uh, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. Like when I was in Japan, I had schoolgirls wanting to take their picture and practice their English on me, and I was like, it was quote unquote good, but it was so different that I had a lot of like nervousness. And I don't know what other areas has that come up for you or been sort of weird or.
Yeah, to me that I think that's a really good example exactly within India, right? Because I feel like from my own upbringing, growing up in Amsterdam, we had a lot of different cultures around us all the time. So I would not necessarily stand out, or nobody else would really stand out either.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as you said, when I went to India, that first experience when we went, hey, let's go for a walk outside a hotel, right? Let's take the metro. Let's do as much as locals do, and then travel that way, only to realize unexpectedly to be, I guess, the standouts or the people that look different, right? And being
Yeah.
stared at and looked at. And at a later point in that trip, people wanted to make pictures with us, which was kind of surprising to me. Like, why would anybody want to take a picture with us? I'm just like a random guy, random
Yeah.
white guy, right? And what's the big deal there? But it does put you in a bit of uncomfortable position because you feel like those emotions, right? A bit of like fear in a sense of, well, I wonder what would happen, right? And are people, what are they gonna react, right? Are they gonna do something? um, I don't really see that anymore today, or don't feel it anymore today, but I can definitely see how that could come up. um, this is
Yeah.
definitely like one of those experiences.
Yeah, and it's just probably one of the many ways to improve, the feeling of empathy for, people around the world and at home. Um, and well, there was some point. Oh, I kind of want to go to an area of more practicality, because sometimes I know when I first started traveling, like I overplanned because I was just super scared and all the things, and that was what I needed. And now I've gotten a lot more relaxed.
Yeah.
There's still some essentials that, like, place to stay, having the transportation, and then making sure that all the financial stuff. Because I know one situation you had was like you got there and you couldn't use your ATM cards. So like how does, and it seemed like you got lucky, but did that experience or like inform, well, what am I going to worry about? What am I not going to worry about? I think that could be helpful for some people because some stuff you worry about it. It's good to have a little worry because it'll make things a lot easier. And then other stuff, like, it's really, even if it goes completely haywire, you're still going to have a fabulous trip.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point because, right, I think each of us has a different kind of area that they're concerned about, right?
That's an important point too. Yeah. It's knowing yourself, I guess.
hmm Yeah, and I feel like for me the more important parts are like, hey, having at least an idea of where I'm gonna stay, right? It doesn't have to be like everywhere, but maybe having already some places pointed out on your journey that you can say, hey, I'm leaving a little bit of flexibility in between, but I have a place where I know that that's going to be kind of my base, so to speak, and from there I can go and explore. So that when you do go out and explore and experience like a day that may be emotionally overwhelming to you, that you have a place to go back to, right? So to me that's very helpful, although I've also heard of people that don't plan anything, right? They don't book
Hmm.
anything ahead of time. But for me, a place to stay, or at least a couple of places to stay, having a generic idea of my route and a base is really helpful. Generically speaking, I also find it good to know where and how to move around, right? Like, is this a place where the public transportation is decent enough that we could go and explore that, or do you need a driver, for example? So in India, right, we had one place to stay, and then we booked a driver who was fantastic, by the way,
Yeah, sounded like he
because
was.
really enriched our experience quite a bit. His name was Ryan. He was just phenomenal. But from that point on, we pretty much said, hey, we trust the locals to know which places to stay from there on, right? And kind of book a week round trip through that particular, I guess, agency without
Hmm.
really seeing any of the places. So we knew where the base to stay, and we had kind of a rough idea about our plan, but had some locals taking care of it. So at
Yeah,
least you have a little bit of certainty and a little bit of uncertainty.
that's what.
Was there
And
anything else? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I've noticed in my experience with traveling that very often, when booking, once you're there local, you can often get a better experience for a way better price than if you book everything ahead of time. Like sometimes the caveat is like, and this is I want to circle back to because you'd mentioned like traveling like a local versus just being super touristy. Because sometimes the touristy things they will, book up or they will be packed or you can't get in, whatever. And I'm sure that's going to be very true going forward. So there's some things like, yeah, you do got to plan ahead, be aware. But then other stuff is just like, yeah, the spur of the moment, like it's super easy and sometimes way less. Um, so I was kind of curious, um, do you still do, the quote unquote touristy things, or are you like a purist of like, no, man, I want to just do what the locals do. Like or do you like a mix of both?
I feel like I do still a mix of both, because some of the touristy things, there are touristy things for a reason, right? There's probably
Yeah.
like a reason why there's so many people flocking to it. But I do feel that I really want to mix it up with activities that locals would do. And I love your example where you say, hey, sometimes it's just good to book something right there, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm also a big fan of not filling up your agenda all the way, because otherwise you take out all the spontaneous opportunities that you may come up, right? You may come up by a local tourist office and that says, hey, we're doing this local trip to do X, Y, and Z, as an right?
Hmm.
And that could take you to new places that are a little off the beaten path, even though I mean, right now, right, with the internet, I suspect it's barely impossible to have anything that's undiscovered. But at least maybe where it's a little bit less touristy or less populated, where you maybe could do some local trips. Like, as an example, we did a cooking class in Indonesia a few years back in Bali, which was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And then and also like an electric bike tour is another example that just took us all the way to the countryside. You speak with some of the locals and you see really the rice fields and how people live. To me, that's just fantastic. Yes, it's also available right on TripAdvisor and everybody can go and do it, but you definitely notice that most people don't do those kind of activities. I don't know
Yeah.
why, but
I,
that's it.
I'm so glad you brought that up because like when I started to discover like, doing a class or a group tour, like it was just a game changer because when I first started traveling, it's like, yeah, I'd have like my Lonely Planet or whatever, and I would just be walking around and I'd have my face in the book and it's like, and this is where, this samurai did this thing for this emperor but it's like either I got to spend twice as much time because I have to read it and look around, or I'm just in the book anyway and I'm missing being right there. Whereas when you have the expert like telling you while you're looking around, it's like it comes to life because you're like seeing it. It almost becomes like a movie. And then like even a cooking class, there's like a story with the cooking of the history and the nature and things like that. It's just so phenomenal. And then you get to connect with other tourists too, which is, I don't know, I've just found amazing. I don't know if you've met any like lifelong friends while traveling, or maybe not even lifelong, but just maybe someone that, you know, you kept in contact and saw him again later through your travels. That just like, I don't even know how I met that guy, but
Yeah, there's this. I wrote about it in the book a little bit on my experience in Cuba and going back to the finances, right? Where I also ended up like not being able to use the ATM, and as unprepared as I was, as I usually am when it comes to like planning my trip, or at least partly. That's why I bring my wife along with me these days because she's better organized and she likes to plan. But yeah, I met this wonderful lady. Her name is Amy, and she was from Australia. And we ended up at the airport from flying from Mexico to Cuba, and we got to talk at that time because she was traveling by herself. And at that time, I was going to meet my friend who was already in Cuba and flew in to a different route. And I met her at the airport. We got to talk and ended up on Cuba, right? And got to talk there again as we landed, and then I realized I didn't have the money, and she was pretty much like out of the blue, like without really knowing me, only maybe for just a few hours, say, hey, just here, take this $50. We may meet again here next week at the same time because we were scheduled to go out the same day, different routes, but same day. And yeah, these kind of experiences to me are like, wow, you barely know somebody, and here they are, just kind of trusting you, giving you some money, right, to go around. And many years later, I ended up in Australia because one of our good
uh,
friends, his name is Hernan, he lives in Australia, and we ended up meeting Amy just for like for lunch, just to say hi and see how she was doing. And I still stay in contact with her today. And I'm sure there's many other people that I
yeah.
don't really jump to mind right now, but I just remember that because I found it just such a fascinating example. Um, while you travel, right? You meet so many wonderful people and travelers that you're like, wow, the world is full of good people.
Yeah, yeah. Like instead of it just being like a giant lonely world, it starts to sort of make it smaller, and it's like, wait, I've got people around the world, and I got other places and people that I could, go meet up with, and yeah, your story about someone giving you the money, like I had a similar situation. I was in Thailand, and I lost my wallet. I like left it on a boat or something like that, and I was like, I lost my wallet, whatever, and some woman, I don't know if she could understand my English but she got the feeling, and she handed me like the equivalent of like 20 US dollars, and I was like, oh well, that is just so awesome. I think I needed it because I think I needed to be able to like take the train home. So it was
Yeah.
like, luckily I had left some cash and an additional credit card in my safe at the hotel. So that's one of my pro tips is like bring multiple credit cards, bring lot, because US dollars are so easy to convert and spend whatever so far in just about anywhere in the world. So like always bring like a couple extra $100 in cash and just leave that in your safe so that if you go out and something happens to your pocket money, but the kindness, I don't know, it's restored my faith in humanity. And kind of every time I travel, I there's always these little reminders of how good people ultimately are.
Yeah, I love that example. That I found so true as well. Like definitely have a backup plan, but in case not, you definitely learn to see the good in people and to see that there's still so many wonderful people out there that are really ready and willing to help. But don't leave it to chance, right?
No, yeah,
If you,
yeah,
if
yeah,
you
yeah.
can.
Chance is gonna happen no matter what. So when there are some things, and again, this is like knowing yourself, and what is important to you. Because like Tom, I'm kind of like you, and having a place to sleep like indoors is big. But like I know my wife is like she's of the mindset where like, well, hey, if it fell through, like there's probably a park or something, and whatever the so you kind of mentioned traveling with your wife, and she has a little bit different style. Was wondering if maybe you could speak to that, maybe some things to think about when traveling with a partner or a friend versus if you just going solo and doing it yourself.
Yeah, to kind of to your story, I'm not sure if I could get my wife to sleep in a park. I think she likes her comforts more. But we did start to take some camping adventures. The most recent one being in Hawaii. I think it was like last year or maybe 2 years ago by now already. With COVID in between, it felt like 2 or 3 years have passed. Could have been just one or
Oh yeah.
or a few months. But yeah, I definitely feel that traveling with a partner, it kind of depends to me also on the person that you travel with, right? Are they
Oh
kind of
yeah.
naturally open or more fearful to travel, right? Are they showing up more organized, more planned? Do they like to work with checklists? And my wife, she loves to kind of come with a list and check things off a list, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, I don't mind anymore. I think in the past I was kind of like the complete opposite, where I just didn't want to have any plans whatsoever and just kind of showing up and kind of see what happens. And
Yeah.
knowing it would work out okay. But she has
Because you
actually taught me. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
so you had like more travel experience than her and gotten to a point of relaxation. Is that kind of how it was
Oh,
at the
good
time,
question.
or have you just naturally sort of been a like more carefree type of personality with a lot of things?
Yeah, I feel like I've been more carefree, but I'm not. I'm kind of interesting to your point. I wonder if it has to do with maybe previous travel experience already.
Hmm.
That may be a good one for me to ponder on a little bit more at some stage and see where that leads me. But I do feel like our personalities are somewhat different when it comes to that. She likes to be more organized, prepared, planned for things that could go wrong, and I'm kind of maybe a bit gullible in a sense, right? To be like, oh, you
Uh,
know what, I things will be fine, nothing will happen, and even if it happens, it will turn out to be okay. But I think you need a little bit of both. I don't really have any very negative experiences like traveling with partners or a group of people. Um, yeah, I feel like maybe having people to be open-minded, right, and not being kind of too different maybe from what you expect, because otherwise it may end up being, I guess, argumentative, right?
yeah,
On trips. And
yeah, because and as much as you can know before you go, so maybe you can even say no to the trip. But sometimes you don't know until you find out. But you really do get to really know a person on a trip. Like so, sometimes it can be very much make or break, or it just makes the relationship even better because you get to know. This wasn't. There was like an interesting situation when I was traveling to Barcelona. I was traveling solo, but I went on a tour, and I ended up. I'll come back to this question after I finish this story about what is your national identity, because I've that's something I started discovering through travel. What was I met some American girls on a tour, and then like we were hanging out, and then it got to dinner time, and Barcelona, the land of like tapas, and like you're in any European city, and they basically you can always find like the best of any like European food. So like there could have been some good French cuisine, or some really good pizza, or some Italian pasta or something. And I was like, yeah, let's you want guys, you ladies want to go get some dinner? And they're like, yeah, we think we want to go get some Irish food. And I was like, what, really? Yeah, we went last night. It was really good. And it's like, okay, and what where and when it turned out, one of the girls, she had been living abroad in Ireland, so it's like she went to Ireland and then went from Ireland to go visit Spain, and just wanted to eat more Irish food. And I was like, I'm out. Like I'm gonna go get some tapas. So I was like, you would not be good travel partners for me in any, at least food wise, not culinary
no.
wise. Yeah. But yeah, I was curious, because you're born in the Netherlands, and I know you've lived in the U.S. a while, and I know when I first started traveling, that's when I realized like, oh, I have Americanness in me, that because having spent most of my life, up until I was about mid-20s, I was like, what, American? That's not a culture or an identity, because it's we get so into like,
Yeah.
well, especially now, the different politicals, this and team that, and but then when I went to other countries, I was like, oh yeah, and I would ran into any American, and there'd just be like a more of a easy bond, and it's just like, oh, this is interesting. And I feel like as I've traveled more, I've shed that identity more and more, that it's like I feel more of a global citizen. And I'm just kind of curious, having, been born in another country, lived in this country and traveled a lot. Like, what's sort of maybe been the identity aspect for you, your journey on that?
I'm kind of smiling on you and listening to your story because I can so relate to that. Not being like American, of course, but even though I could probably classify after being here for almost 10 years as American by now, but more of being a global citizen. I
Mm,
really feel that really I would have first re-identify with still being Dutch, even though I would be traveling in Europe quite a bit and
yeah,
also maybe international other like outside of Europe. But I feel like the more you want travels and also being living abroad, right? And you change how you look at things. I even change when I come back to the Netherlands. I look at things very differently now than I did when I was living there, right? I see, I guess, both the good in quotation marks and the
right.
bad. And yeah, I feel like it almost feels like you don't resonate with certain things anymore, but you resonate with new things, right? And similar when you go to maybe other countries where, hey, I, I don't really know, like it's almost like you don't really know where you belong anymore at some point, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
yeah, I belong to this world, but not in a specific country or city or state or anything like that, right? So
Yeah.
it's an
And
interesting experience.
yeah, and sometimes there can be like a little bit of sadness because it's like, do I not belong? But then there's also this, I don't know, to me it's like almost a sense of cultivating true freedom, because it's like you can try anything, do anything, and figure out what you truly want out of everything possible. Sometimes, I don't know, I've been noticing so much that often people think they're free because they get to do what they like and what they don't like, but they don't even know why they like what they like or don't. And it's just like you just are celebrating getting to be in your habit. And it's like our habits are in a lot of ways the lowest form of us. Like you do a lot of coaching, and like that's like living like a lizard. It's like, yeah, I'm free to live like a lizard, but it's like you're a human being. Like, use that prefrontal cortex, man, and like question things. And
Yeah, actually it's funny because I had read that post that you had made on habits, and it really resonated with me as well, because I remember I was living like that as well many years ago, and I think that is kind of part of the reason why I went into coaching and doing hypnotherapy and things of that nature, because I felt almost like stuck and stagnant and feeling like, who am I really, right? Like,
yeah.
and I remember one of the turning points for me was as I was in like the corporate office, but I was looking outside the window and I saw people coming in and out, right, driving in the cars. Like, holy cow, is this what life is all about? Like, day in, day out, the same routine. And you really start to question that, right? Like you said, you really start to question your those habits, but then you start to question your own habits and really think about, are these habits working for me, or are they really like other people's habits, society, cultural habits, habits of upbringing, right, that have been ingrained in us for the longest period of time. And I think that's why I love travel, because it forces you to get out of those habits, right, your natural routines, so to speak, and end up seeing different people's habits, and again exposed to yourself at that point, right? Like,
Hmm.
wow, I didn't know I was doing this, or I was so caught up in believing that this was the right way to live, and then you realize, hey, there's so many different ways to live.
Yeah, like one of the tidbits in from your book when you first get to India is the plane lands and they're spraying all this disinfectant chemical. And I had that, I think it was like either in the Philippines or something. It's like, what are they poisoning? They're gassing us. Like, this is, and it's what I was like, if you were at your home country, you would get up and you would like probably try to storm the plane to get out and you whatever. But like when you're in, it's like the entitlement goes and you just sit and you observe, and because you're like, I am not where I'm not in my hometown. Like, apparently everyone's okay with this. Why am I not okay with this? And then sometimes you get informed, but then other times it's just by experiencing like that, oh man, I can't control everything around me.
Yeah, and maybe to going back to what you said earlier, like it almost becomes freeing in a way, right? Because like so much of the habits or things that we do is, I guess, to control our environment, or I guess the illusion of control is probably the better word, because I feel at the end of the day you really don't have much control over your environment, even though we may believe we do, right? um
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit painful, but I don't know. I'm kind of reminded of like a bird hatching from an egg. It's like you can stay in that egg, but at some point it's gonna be painful whether you stay or whether you crack it open because you're growing in some way. And so I don't know. I'm more and more I'm for the like, well, let's go through the pain of cracking this egg open so that we can get onto the next stage and enjoy the big brighter world. Because I don't know. It's just there's always more and more. And maybe I'll I'll leave with this final question of kind of what's next for Tom. Like what's going on? Because the book just got released. I don't know, was it a couple of weeks ago? I know it's number one on several of the lists in Amazon. So what's next? Where are we going?
Yeah, there's so many things spinning through my mind right now, at least for the last few weeks. As I kind of started writing book number 2 already. A few weeks back, I started with a chapter on Costa Rica because my wife is from Costa Rica, so I really want to, and it's one of also like one of the most beautiful countries in the world to visit. There's just so much to see and so much to learn and to share from those experiences. So I started writing that. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I can get book number 2 out this year.
Nice.
And yeah, additionally, I want to keep traveling too. So I'm kind of thinking about my next trips. There's a lot of countries on the list. I do want to visit, go back to Europe and visit my mom and my sister and my good friends that still live there too. It's been This year's gonna be like 3 years
Oh
since
wow.
when we were planning to go last year, but it was like right at the start of COVID, so we didn't make it. But
Yeah.
this year, hopefully most of the restrictions will be lifted so we can visit. And then additionally, like Africa is high on the list, and so is South America. Specifically, Peru has been on our list for the longest period of time, and seeing Machu Picchu and do the Inca Trail, it just looks very fascinating. And in Africa, obviously, because of the beautiful country, the wildlife, the people, right? It's just so many beautiful places still to visit. So that's really what's next, to travel more, to travel as much as I can, and write about it and share, and ultimately inspire hopefully other people to also get out of their comfort zone and do some traveling and see the world. The world has so much to offer.
That well said. Like I definitely encourage people go pick up the book. It's like I don't know, just go get it. It's ridiculously priced on Amazon. The Transformative Power of Travel by Tom Leegstra. You can also go to his website, Tom Leegstra. That's LEEGSTRA.com. He's got offering of a free overview of how to travel in challenging times. So you can check that out, and then look forward to it. So you go over India, you go over Cuba, and you go over France. But you also have like so many tips that for just travel in general. So even if those aren't on your next step, like just for like the resources of how to worry about money, how to finding places, and then just sort of the emotionally taking you through, so that if you've never traveled before, or even if you have, but like you've only traveled to like the state over or something like that. So just get it, I would say. And for me, my website's justinwink.com. So there you can sign up for updates on the podcast and connect with me on social media. I finally have a email address for this podcast. So if you want to email me any questions, it's podcast@justinwink.com. So once again, I want to thank Tom for being on the show. Thanks so much.
Thanks for
Appreciate
having
it.
me, Justin. It was a
All right.
pleasure being here. I love your podcast. Please keep it up. It's wonderful.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a good day. Bye.